On the phone, it's a pleasure to welcome to the program Neil Barofsky, now teaching at NYU, author of Bailout, an inside account of how Washington abandoned Main Street while rescuing Wall Street. He is the former SIGTARP, that is the Special Inspector General of TARP, the Troubled Asset Relief Program. Welcome to the program, Neil.
Thank you. Proudly the holder of the worst acronym in all of government.
SIGTARP's pretty messy, I guess. And just to be associated with TARP, I guess, doesn't help, frankly. But let's start with how you were appointed to SIGTARP. It was you got the call from Michael Mukasey.
It was actually from my U.S. attorney, Mike Garcia, who was the U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York. I'd spent 8 years as a federal prosecutor doing international narcotics cases, and then eventually securities fraud. And early 2008, I was asked to start up a mortgage fraud group. Right after TARP was passed, the White House put a call out to U.S. attorneys looking for a prosecutor who had background in securities fraud and mortgage fraud. So Mike asked me if I'd be interested in the job. At the time, I said no. It was sort of the last thing I wanted to do was move to D.C. I was pretty happy being a prosecutor in New York, sort of all I ever wanted to do. But after some gentle arm twisting, I eventually put in for the job. And really within a matter of days, I was told that I was going to be the nominee.
All right, so I want to just start. Whatever happened to that 2008 mortgage fraud group that you were headed up?
They continued to do, make good cases. Our focus was on rings of fraudsters who were, ripping off lenders and securities holders of the bonds, people who were basically using the complete absence of underwriting standards to profit, as well as doing some cases against a handful of predatory lenders. So, we were focused, primarily on those types of fraud cases at the time. So that continued, and it still had some great successes, and I know they put a lot of people in jail.
Did you guys have a sense at that time of just how the breadth and the scope of the fraud that was going on in the servicing and the originating of mortgages?
We had a good idea because the cases that we were seeing, it was remarkably how easy it was. These were complicated cases in that they had these entire rings of lawyers and appraisers and mortgage brokers and originators and insiders, but the crimes themselves were fairly simple because the bottom line was the originators just didn't care. They didn't have any anti-fraud provisions in there. They weren't really doing any underwriting. At sometimes, insiders would be cooperating. The goal, it was one of those things where the goal of the big banks, their originating arms, sort of everyone who was involved in the process, from the originator or mortgage broker who's dealing with a potential borrower, all the way up to the big Wall Street, too big to fail banks, they were concerned with one thing, which was generating as much volume as possible. So it really opened the door to fraud. And we did have a sense back then that it was so rampant and so widespread that it could have been a harbinger of a bigger problem. Certainly, that's what it was.
Right. And so when you went down to Washington, what did you assume that your job would be, and how did it change?
Well, I went down. I just assumed, okay, I was a prosecutor for 8 years, and that was my job. And I assumed that they got me to do that because part of the job of SIGTARP was we were a brand new law enforcement agency that we built from scratch. And our job, as I saw it, was to put people in jail who would inevitably try to steal from the TARP program. It was so much money, hundreds of billions of dollars being pushed out. And even by the time I got down there, it was pretty clear that the Treasury Department put almost no restrictions and no conditions and really no anti-fraud protections as they were pushing the money out. So I figured our primary role would be law enforcement. When I got there, though, and I really started to see just how vulnerable these programs were and how little thought or care was going into it, I very quickly had to shift gears and became much more concerned with trying to put in the right taxpayer protections before the programs were announced or before the money went out the door, and that's what set me eventually on a pretty hard collision course with the Treasury Department.
That must have been, I mean, that's a fairly sort of, I guess, a radical reorientation for you, right? At that point, I mean, if you're going down there, I guess you're you're going down there with the assumption that there's going to be situations where people are literally skimming money out of this and sort of, I mean, just sheer fraud as opposed to sort of policy construction.
Yeah, I didn't really think of it that was going to be the job, to be honest with you, but it was very, very quick. It became evident. Within the first week, when I started pressing for what I thought were some pretty basic, pretty common sense conditions. I mean, things like, hey, maybe we should have the banks report on how they're using TARP funds so we can see if these policy goals of increasing lending and increasing, helping out the economy and helping out homeowners, whether they're doing anything actually to advance that. That at the time didn't seem to me to be the most radical idea, but it was the vehemence with which my ideas were rejected, and other ideas like really basic anti-fraud protections. And it wasn't just that they said no. They said, no, you're stupid. No, you're being political. Ultimately it culminated in it being screamed at by the Secretary of the Treasury, Tim Geithner, eventually, for these very, very basic ideas. And what I saw and what I quickly came to learn was that they really weren't so concerned about the interests of the taxpayer or the interests of anti-fraud. What their real number one concern was that of the big banks and advocating for the big banks. And so it got to the point where I would be making, pretty pedestrian recommendation. Hey, here's this hole that we can all agree is a real problem or vulnerability in the program. What should we need to do something about it? And the response would be, no, Neil, you don't have to worry about that. These are the big banks. They would never risk their reputation by putting profit or exploiting a conflict of interest and risk their reputations with the government. I mean, it was like I was in the Twilight Zone when I started hearing those types of responses.
So, all right. So you head down to D.C. You're there in, I guess, in late 2008. And who are the first people that you met with, and how did they express what TARP was supposed to do?
So the first person, after I went through the interview process, on my first day in December of 2008, I got sworn in by Hank Paulson, who was then Secretary of the Treasury. And the people I was dealing with primarily was the people on his team who were running TARP, Neil Kashkari, who was running TARP, and the General Counsel, Bob Hoyt. And their concern was really about getting the money out to the banks as quickly as possible. And as I started suggesting conditions, their number one concern at that point was, if we do anything, we might scare off the banks. We might risk upsetting the banks. They didn't want to change conditions on the banks. And at that point, there really was no interest in anything else, homeowners or taxpayer protections. As time went on, I started dealing with more and more officials. And again, it was a similar type of response. I dealt with the president, the now president of the New York Fed, Bill Dudley, on a $200 billion program that he wanted to. The only protection that they had was to rely on the credit rating agencies. And even when I pointed out to him that these are the same credit rating agencies who did such a terrible, terrible job in the crisis, his defense was that he was confident that they wouldn't embarrass themselves again. And this was what was substituting for protecting taxpayers and anti-fraud provisions was being convinced that the major players who had failed our country, who failed the economy, failed in every aspect of the word, either wouldn't embarrass themselves or wouldn't risk their reputations.
What were the credit ratings supposed to do in terms of providing some type of oversight for this money?
Well, this particular program was eventually announced to go up to potentially $1 trillion of buying certain types of bonds, asset-backed securities, similar to those that blew up so spectacularly in the run-up to the crisis. And rather than when I saw the program, we saw pretty easy ways to game the program. Take advantage of conflicts of interest, collusion among buyers and sellers, sort of the usual things you would suspect to see in any type of white-collar crime for so much money being involved. But the one thing that they were going to rely on was that they were going to require that these bonds have AAA rated assets, the highest ranking by the credit rating agencies. Notwithstanding that, I think it was something like 90% of the credit rating agencies' AAA assets in 2007 were downgraded to junk. They were just dead wrong, and now they wanted to bet up to $1 trillion on those same credit rating agencies. It was an otherworldly moment for us, but it really helped solidify and made us understand very early on what we were dealing with, and that we were dealing with folks who had so been captured by Wall Street and so adopted the Wall Street ideology that they really weren't going to be able to see the world the way that we saw it.
Now, but is that an admission when they say that this time the credit agencies will actually do their job? That seems to me to be an admission that there was not just a tremendous amount of incompetence by the credit rating agencies, but some type of willful neglect at best, right? I mean, if you can trust the credit agencies to sort of do a 180 on their ability to measure the value of these huge tranches of securities, it implies that they sort of almost purposely didn't do their job in the first place.
It's certainly a fair reading. I mean, again, the key words was embarrass themselves. So it wasn't that they were suddenly going to go from being incompetent to competent. It's just now, because again of this specter of shame, they're somehow going to change their behavior, and it's absurd. I mean, it's an absolute absurd to attribute human emotions to these institutions that have demonstrated that they would sell their soul for a few points of profit. And that's why when shoveling so much money out, it was so important to have really strong protections. It's the same thing with giving out the TARP money to the banks and this hope that they would somehow use it to achieve policy goals that are best for the country. Of course, they're going to do things that are best for their profits. They're, to make money for their executives. And that was something I have to say never really changed during my time in Washington. There was always this deference and presumption of this inherent goodness of the large too big to fail institutions that was unproven by facts or experience.
When you got down there, were the people that you were dealing with in Treasury, and were they still all in sort of like some state of shock? I mean, in other words, there was a real concern, obviously, that the entire financial system was about to crash. And, I mean, TARP, in the sense that something needed to be done, obviously there was a valid concern there. I mean, is that accurate?
Yeah, there was still definitely a level of panic that really extended throughout 2009. When Hank Paulson swore me in, one of the first things he did was mention what the daily movement of the stocks futures index was for that morning. At the time, it was a little surprising, even though we understood what was going on, that the Secretary of Treasury was still keeping score of his efforts on the daily movements of the stock exchanges. And that concern went forward. But, it's also important to remember that TARP was supposed to do a lot more than just save the banks and just preserve the status quo. It was supposed to have a broader impact on the economy, on unemployment. And importantly, it was also supposed to help struggling homeowners. And those concerns weren't just footnotes or add-ons. That's how they got Congress to pass the bill, because there's plenty of Democrats in the House who are not going to vote just for a bailout of financial institutions and their executives. They demanded those that are going to be included, and that Treasury promise, a promise Treasury made repeatedly, to advance those goals for homeowners and to deal with the foreclosure crisis, and in that way deal with the broader economy. So it wasn't just supposed to make it so that the big banks could have a record bonus year in 2010, which they did. It was supposed to be a program for the entire country, and that just never happened.
Yeah. Now, one of the mechanisms where, I mean, the choice at that time could have been to set up some type of agency that would have essentially, instead of buying these securities, they would have sort of actually gone in and gotten more granular with the actual mortgages and bailed out the mortgage holders, who then, I guess, would sort of trickle it up to the banks, if you will, as opposed to relying on the banks to sort of shower it down on the mortgage holders. And HAMP was supposedly some type of middle ground. I mean, is that a fair assessment?
I mean, there are a lot of options on the table, and look, I've been accused of 20/20 hindsight, and I understand that, but that essentially, of course, was my job as Special Inspector General. But there were certainly ways to do and to achieve the goals of TARP within the programs that they announced, without necessarily rethinking that they shouldn't have done this or they shouldn't have done that. But with the right level of commitment, with the right level of care, and in belief that was what was supposed to happen, we still could have had a much better program that helped a lot more people. But fundamentally, even the HAMP, the mortgage modification program, the program that was supposed to help and announced to help up to 4 million people, even that from the very beginning was hobbled not only by poor planning, but by bad vision. Secretary Geithner told us when we were confronting him, me along with Elizabeth Warren and others in 2009, and when she was grilling him, Elizabeth Warren, who back then was the head of one of the other oversight bodies, one arm of Congress, and his response wasn't, this is the path by which we could help 4 million homeowners. His response was, this program will foam the runway. In other words, make it a softer landing for the big banks by extending out the foreclosure crisis. So that focus on helping homeowners was never really there.
See, that's the part that's sort of fascinating, because it's not that HAMP has not functioned the way that it was designed. HAMP, it seems to me, functioned exactly as the way it was designed. It's just that it was sold as being designed to do something different.
Exactly, and I think it's one of the things that I tell in the book, so people can understand, is that so much of this program makes absolutely no sense as a program that's designed to help 4 million homeowners, but it makes perfect sense as a program that's just designed to help the banks. I mean, things like allowing the banks and actually giving the banks incentives to rack up fees and then pull the rug out from under homeowners and put them in foreclosure because they can make more money doing that than putting them through a modification. Like, those things don't make sense other than you understand that, well, gee, that's going to help the banks profit, and that's what the program is all about.
So the theory was that if we can we design something that looks like it's going to help homeowners, and what it's really doing is just sort of spacing out these foreclosures, allowing time for the banks to sort of right themselves and be able to absorb all of this mess. And that's the way it was designed. Do you think that when President Obama, and obviously I'm asking you to comment on something you're probably not necessarily privy to, but do you think that Geithner would have expressed the purpose of HAMP to President Obama as something that is supposed to provide a soft landing for the banks?
It's very hard to know that. And look, I was an Obama contributor, Obama supporter in the election. And, one of the things, it was almost as if, and my deputy, who came with me from Southern District, New York, was also a Democrat. And early on in particular, we used to do these mental gymnastics where we would think that, gee, it can't be that the president is aware of these biases. It can't be aware of this lack of transparency. This has to be something that's confined to the Treasury Department. But that changed for me in July. I was sitting on the couch, actually, after a long day of testifying in Congress, and I put on the TV, and it was a press conference the president was giving, and he was confronted by a question about the lack of transparency in these programs, along the lines of not having the banks report on what they were doing with the money. And he sort of seemed taken aback, wasn't really on top of the issue, but said he was going to follow up and get back. And that moment sort of gave us this ray of hope that, gee, now maybe the White House is going to get involved and will be talking to us and our concerns will be taken more seriously. That never actually happened. And over time, the White House sort of joined the game of some really deceptive and dirty tricks against us. So I don't know the answer to your question, but I know ultimately, as someone who's the head of an agency, the president bears the responsibility for these programs and their failures just as much as any chief executive is responsible for key decisions that are made under his watch.
Right. I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't necessarily matter. It's really the results. It's just I'm just sort of fascinated by. I mean, it's quite clear that there was no interest in helping homeowners directly. There still doesn't seem to be terribly much interest, even in light of the results that we've seen, that it continues to stagnate our economy because people are you have so many homeowners who are underwater.
Absolutely.
I'm just curious because we've seen sort of dribs and drabs of insight into this. I think Barney Frank in a couple of interviews has suggested that Hank Paulson had offered up the notion of creating some type of agency or using TARP to function by paying off mortgages or reducing principals, but that President Obama simply had to sign off on it. I guess President-elect Obama at the time.
Look, I mean, and you don't even have to go that far. They had this administration, President Obama, Secretary Geithner, had $50 billion allocated to helping homeowners. They had another $200 billion that was unobligated, unallocated, that they could have used for principal reduction or any other type of housing program, and they chose not to do so.
It's still sitting there.
Well, it's actually now, they waited so long, it's actually now, there's about $47 billion that's still sitting there, and the other $200 billion they essentially gave back without ever using. So it's important to remember that these were choices that were made, not the result of political wrangling, not the result of obstruction from one house or another. These were conscious choices not to use the same firepower that they did to save the banks to deal with struggling homeowners. And again, the evidence is just so overwhelming when you think about how the banks just pummeled homeowners during that program, and how really just broke the program rules and abused homeowners and really caused a lot of harm to a lot of people, leaving them, I talk about this in the book, worse off than they would have been if there had been no program. And again, the administration's response was to do absolutely nothing. They refused to penalize them. They refused to hold them to their contract. And that's one of the reasons, as you said, why we still have, a stagnant economy. Is we have to deal with the housing problem. It's been a weight on the neck of our country now for years, and there's just no serious debate about it. And you see this in the election right now. You don't hear Romney or Obama having a real big plan to deal with the ongoing foreclosure crisis.
And so, did you ever hear from members of Congress who had voted for TARP with this notion that there would be substantive relief directly for homeowners, that we wouldn't necessarily be reliant upon the sort of the good graces, I guess, of the banks to do the right thing? Did you start hearing from members of Congress who were, or did they not perceive SIGTARP as the place to go with these complaints?
No, absolutely. I mean, when we were criticizing the failures of the homeowner program, the HAMP program, we would get support from both sides of the aisle, of course, for very different reasons. But particularly progressives in the House, I think, felt the most betrayed within the Congressional Black Caucus, and other very progressive members of the House would often say to us, both on the record during hearings as well as in private conversations, just how frustrated, angry, and betrayed they felt. They sort of presumed that it would happen under Hank Paulson and under the Republican, but really, again, the word I would use was a real sense of betrayal. Because one of the things that happened to get the second half of TARP funds out, Larry Summers and the new administration wrote a letter to Congress saying what they were going to do with the TARP money, saying they were going to spend at least $50 billion on homeowners, saying that they were going to impose conditions on the banks to get them to put the money back into the economy, not to just hoard it and build their fortress balance sheets. And after the money was released, nothing in that letter was lived up upon, and there was that real sense of betrayal in Congress.
Do you think that those people in the administration, do you think they just thought it was going to work out? Do you think that I'm trying to get a sense of just sort of what their perception is when they say that we're going to be doing X, Y, and Z through HAMP, for instance, or through other programs to provide direct relief, and they don't ultimately. Are they saying this with the notion of, what's going to happen really is that the banks are going to right themselves. They're going to do an okay job, and as long as we've saved the banks, we have sort of solidified the structure that our economy functions on, and everything's going to work themselves out. or is it that at the end of the day we can withstand screwing these homeowners, and we just need to say this because Congress is feckless anyways?
Yeah, I would say from a cynical perspective, struggling homeowners don't exactly have a lot of political power. They're as far as voting blocks, they don't really exercise any influence. They don't have lobbyists who are there arguing on their behalf. And the bottom line is that they're a group that can be taken for granted when it comes to electoral politics. So I think there is an element of that. But I actually think even more powerful than that is this ideology, this world view that I saw over and over again at Treasury, which just defied with the biggest banks. Then that's partly a result of the revolving door. A lot of the senior Treasury officials I dealt with had come from the biggest banks: Merrill Lynch, Goldman Sachs, Bear Stearns, the usual suspects. And when you have that echo chamber of people all sort of having that same Wall Street first perspective, it's not terribly surprising. And people who are outside that perspective, like myself, like Elizabeth Warren, it wasn't just that we were disagreed with. We were mocked. There was a condescension towards us. There's a condescension to the American people. I remember one time I was just going to put out some numbers from one of the programs, and I was told, this was indicative of a number of different examples, that the American people, they just wouldn't understand it. They're not sophisticated to understand what this all means, and that I shouldn't have that level of transparency. And that attitude really permeated so much of what was going on with the bailout, and I think that influences that attitude as much as anything else. What's good for Wall Street is good for America. And when you combine that with the incentives for those who didn't come from Wall Street or didn't make their millions in Wall Street, and their desire to spin through that revolving door and cash out, that creates for a lot of groupthink that goes in one direction without a lot of pushback from advocates who are thinking outside of the banks for the broader taxpayer and for homeowners.
And I want to get just a little bit into the personalities, because there's a couple of good anecdotes about that sort of like capture that sense of being condescended to and sort of, I don't know, subtly threatened. But how did you get the job? I mean, was it simply that they just didn't pay much attention? I mean, because, you were sort of the, or at least to the extent that you could have been, a fly in the ointment. And did they just simply not even imagine that somebody could be brought in who would have your perspective?
I guess so. I think you're right that it wasn't a lot of attention. I mean, this was a lame duck president, and I think that they saw someone who had the right resume as far as background in the exact areas of fraud that were likely to bubble up in this program. My confirmation process, I had a little bit of a hiccup with one Republican who put a hold, I think more because he objected to the whole idea of having an oversight body than anything else. But I think it was, on paper, I looked like the perfect person to protect taxpayer money. I didn't really have an auditing background. I didn't have a reporting background, so it would have been difficult to see that I would end up being so focused on these issues, I think, if you were just looking at my resume on paper. And it is unusual for an inspector general to take as much of a role as I did in taking my issues to Congress and to the public to try to influence change. So I didn't think they knew what was coming. But really, I have to say that throughout the process, my politics was irrelevant. All they really cared about was my background and my history of prosecutions.
And did you sat down with I guess it was there's a story where Allison sat you down. I mean, this is what it's fascinating to me, because I think like the idea that you would come in with this perspective, I think is just so foreign to people in that world that I would imagine at first they just had no idea what you were doing. I mean, tell us that story and who Allison was at that time.
No, I think you're right, and I think a lot of a lot of the reaction to me and a lot of sort of the rumors they were spreading about me in the press and continue to do so today are sort of based on that just complete lack of understanding that someone can come to Washington and actually just care about doing their job and not sort of planning what's my next job in the administration going to be or how am I going to cash this out on Wall Street. But this happened in 2010. So Herb Allison was running TARP. He was the assistant secretary who was responsible for administering the TARP program. And he had a storied background. He had been the president of Merrill Lynch. He had been the CEO of TIAA-CREF. He had come out of retirement to take over Fannie Mae before getting tapped for this job. And we just clashed from day one. I talk about the book, really from our first meeting. We just had such a different worldview, as you can imagine, from someone coming from Wall Street versus someone who made their career prosecuting Wall Street. And we had a lot of tension, a lot of shouting matches over things big and as trivial as Saturday Night Live clips that I'd used with Secretary Geithner in a PowerPoint presentation. There was sort of this wide array of disagreement. So I had suggested that we have a drink offline.
Wait, he was a much bigger fan of the early years.
Apparently. So we sit down for a drink, and his approach to me was basically to say, look, Neil, you're a smart guy. You're obviously talented. You're having a family. My wife was pregnant. She was due in just 2 or 3 weeks with our daughter, our first child. And he sort of was warning me. He said, Neil, you're doing real harm to yourself because of your tone, meaning my negative tone of being very critical to Wall Street and of the administration. And he explained that I might want to have a job after this, and I needed to think about what I would be doing afterwards, and that there was this harm for my tone. But, however, if I were to improve my tone and be a little bit more upbeat and positive, I could cash in for that big pot of gold at the end of the Wall Street rainbow. And when I told him I wasn't really interested in that, he talked about, well, what else? Maybe an appointment, a judgeship. And when I explained to him that I didn't think that was very likely because of my criticisms of the White House, he said, "Oh no, those things can get solved." And this was a very, very Washington approach. I joked with my deputy, who was also, like me, a former narcotics prosecutor, that it was almost similar to what Pablo Escobar would do, in that when he was dealing with trying to corrupt people in Colombia, the big narcotics kingpin, he would do something that was called the bullet or the bribe, or the gold or the lead, which basically meant he would go to a judge or a police officer and say, either take this giant pile of pesos and do my bidding, or you'll get shot in the head. And we sort of joked that was the Washington equivalent. Ultimately, though, with reflection, I think what Herb was doing was really explaining to me how it all worked on Wall Street and in Washington. And fundamentally, that is the problem with our government, is that we give these incentives for regulators not to do their jobs, but to have the appropriate tone so that they can advance or move forward. And that's really a very broken system that we have. And I think any type of meaningful reform has to go beyond the obvious, which to me includes breaking up the banks, but really rethinking our approach to regulation and what incentives we give to our regulators so that it makes more economic and moral sense for them to do their jobs and be aggressive rather than strive to find that Goldilocks perfect tone that will enable them to have a more secure financial future.
This may be outside your portfolio to a certain extent, but it seems to me that dynamic permeates a lot of our culture. I mean, you're teaching at NYU now, but it's not impossible to imagine that type of situation in academia, or frankly in the USA Attorney's office, the U.S. Attorney's office in some instances, where it's just sort of you're involved in some larger structure, and the idea is that, like, look, you're causing issues here, and that's not the way. Because it sounds to me like it's just full on just careerism, and it's that much more problematic in government structure when ostensibly, there's supposed to be another sort of player in the room, and that is the citizen, society.
No, I think you're right, and it absolutely is. It's in a lot of different places, but to me, it is most egregious when people whose job is to advocate on behalf of others, of of the third party, the taxpayer, the U.S. citizen, the people that your job is to protect and to defend when you start putting those interests first. But certainly it exists elsewhere. But I think it's also important to know it doesn't have to be that way. So much of human behavior, so much of the financial crisis and its response really boils down to very human incentives. So while it was wrong to trust the bank to do our policy, it's not necessarily that the bank or the bankers are inherently evil. It just doesn't match with their incentives. Their incentives are to use their advantages, this presumption of bailout, to make as much money as possible. And we have to change the incentives. I come from a U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan where the incentives weren't like that. If you wanted to advance in that office and get promoted and get a really good job out in private practice, it was by being very aggressive, by making very big cases. That was the incentive structure. That's not necessarily the case in other parts of the Department of Justice, and certainly isn't the case in other parts of government. But with really strong, effective leadership and a real commitment to the idea that we have a problem and have to eradicate this problem, there is a very, very difficult path that can be followed. But that first step of acknowledging the problem might be the most difficult at all, because one thing I never saw in Washington was anyone admit that they made a mistake or that something was wrong. And that's part of the problem, too.
Do you think at this point that it's possible to have someone who has that? Because what you're talking about on some level is a full-on worldview or an ideological perspective or a distrust of. Maybe distrust is even too strong of a word, but even a neutral sort of objective perspective on those incentive structures and on the importance of some functions in society versus others. It sounds like everyone in there and Geithner, not the least of which, just has this perception as if they were raised by bankers in the wild, where these are the people who brought them this. Before I could walk, the bankers brought me the food, and these are the people who make society function. Is it even possible for people to get to these positions of power at this point and have have any other mentality?
It's extremely difficult. The problem is that we have a status quo that enriches few. But those few that are being enriched by it have a remarkable amount of power, and a lot of people who are loyal to them and want to become one of them. And that's part of the problem with the revolving door. And to acknowledge that the system is broken is to acknowledge failure, that we've failed, that our regulatory system has failed to protect the American people, it's failed to protect the taxpayer. And upsetting the status quo like that is a remarkably difficult thing, would require a level of courageousness that we just don't see in our elected politicians, because the path there, again, is disrupting a very powerful status quo, and the status quo will fiercely protect itself. And so it's not going to come naturally. It's going to have to come, I believe, from the bottom up. And there needs to be a radical readjustment and grassroots effort to come up. And look, there's a lot of it out there already. There's a lot of anger out there from Occupy, even from the Tea Party, and from so many other people in between. There's this sense, people understand that our system is broken. People understand that whether they call it crony capitalism or the bankers' influence, whatever the different terms that we have for it, that recognition is out there. It just has to be harnessed and unified and pushed for direct democracy. And we have to stop voting for candidates who continue to push the status quo down our throat and start trying to find candidates who will come out and say enough, and I want to break this status quo. But it's not. It's going to be an extremely difficult path.
Well, Neil Barofsky, the book is Bailout, an inside account of how Washington abandoned Main Street while rescuing Wall Street. I want everyone to go out and buy this book so that we can sort of at least create a competing incentive structure than the one that you may have followed had you'd come to terms with Herb Allison. So I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about this.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.